Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to meet and learn about the work of Decolonize This Place. I am Lisa Gold, the Executive Director of the Asian American Arts Alliance, or A4. Just a quick accessibility check. I am a Hapa, half Korean, half white woman with a mix of gray and dark brown hair, pulled up, wearing a white t-shirt, sitting in front of a bookcase. And I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Andrieux. I am a Black woman with a short afro that is half up, half down, wearing a t-shirt that has a tan t-shirt with red and black markings on it, and I am sitting on Lenape land. Just wanted to say hello, and I'm very, very thankful to be in community with all of you.
Thanks, Amy. Do you want to say anything about MoCADA? Or no?
Sure. Well, I never introduced MoCADA. It's hilarious because I have so many jobs. I'm a true West Indian. I'm the executive director and chief curator at MoCADA, which stands for the Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora and Art here in Fort Greene. MoCADA's been around for 22 years, and we center our practice on using art as a vehicle for social change through education, exhibitions, and community programming. I do want to say one thing in addition to that is that I'm really, really excited about today because Decolonize This Place is here. And, I had an awesome opportunity to invite Amin, what was that, I think a year ago, to sit on a panel for the Creative Justice Initiative. And I was already floored by the work that they did as a group, as a collective. But then to hear just to hear the passion and the drive to truly decolonize and hold everyone accountable to that was just amazing. So the fact that they're blessing us with their time today is just, I'm just overjoyed. So that's where I'm at. How are you feeling today, by the way, Lisa?
I am thrilled about this. I have to say, I'm so excited. It's like the highlight of my day because I had to go to the dentist today. So this is way much better than that. So just like a few words, very few words about A4, the Asian American Arts Alliance. We are a 39-year-old nonprofit dedicated to ensuring greater representation, equity, and opportunities for Asian American Pacific Islander artists and cultural organizations. We do that through resource sharing, promotion, and community building events. And this program, I'm very excited. So we're presenting this conversation in conjunction with our Bandung Residency, which is a new partnership between A4 and MoCADA that was created to build solidarity and allyship between the Black and Asian American Pacific Islander communities. So we have an amazing cohort of artists that are participating in this, and we have incredible speakers and public conversations such as this one, and we have two more. The next one is scheduled for Tuesday, July 5th with Nobuko Miyamoto and Tayo Na. They are incredible, lifelong activists. So I'm just going to do a very quick land acknowledgement because in the before times we would be meeting in one of our offices, which are on the Manse, Lenape, and Canarsie people's unceded lands. But since we're meeting virtually, I would like to share a digital land acknowledgement, which was written by Canadian theater artist Adrienne Wong, since we're all occupying different physical spaces. And since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We're using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art that we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. And now, before we introduce Decolonize This Place, I would like to share two videos that they will be speaking about later. So let me get that set up, and here we go.
with my fist, one individual was not enough. It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness to stand by and do what has to be done when it has to be done. It is our duty to fight for our freedom! It is our duty to fight for our freedom! It is our duty to win! We must love each other and support each other! We have nothing to lose but our change! At this point, I think that it is important to make one thing very clear. I advocate self-determination for my people and for all oppressed people inside the United States.
Compromise? What is compromising? Compromising for what? Compromising for what reason? To compromise for what?
What astonishes me is the obvious cowardice of the police. How are you afraid of a man running away from you? How are you afraid of somebody standing in a grocery store on a phone with a toy gun that you could buy in the store? How could you be afraid of a little boy? And who are these people who call 911?
Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America. The primary. There's a lot of America that belongs to me yet.
How much money you got? 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 A lot. How much money you got? A lot. How many problems you got? A lot. How many people done doubted you? A lot. Left you out to rot? A lot. How many pray that you flop? A lot. How many lawyers you got? A lot. How many times you got shot? A lot. How many niggas you shot? A lot. How many times did you ride? A lot. How many niggas done died? A lot. How many times did you cheat? A lot. How many times did you lie? A lot. How many times did she leave? A lot. How many times did she cry? A lot. How many chances she done gave you? Fuck around with these thighs. Every day that I'm alive, I'ma ride with this stick. I'd rather be broke in jail than be dead and rich. Told my brothers take my breath if I turn to a snitch. But I'm 21 for L, ain't no way I'ma switch. Penitentiary chances just to make a couple bucks. My heart so cold, I could put it in my cup. Game versus the world, me and my dog, it was us. Then you went and wrote a statement and that really fucked me up. My brother lost his life and it turned me to a beast. My brother got life and it turned me to the streets. I've been through the storm and it turned me to a G. But the other side was sunny, I get paid to rap on beats. How much money you got? A lot. How many problems you got? A lot. How many people done doubted you? A lot. Left you out to rot? A lot. How many pray that you flop? A lot. How many lawyers you got? A lot. How many times you got shot? A lot. How many niggas you shot? A lot. How many times did you ride? A lot. How many niggas done died? A lot. How many times did you cheat? A lot. How many times did you lie? A lot. How many times did she leave? A lot. How many times did she cry? A lot. How many chances she done gave you? Fuck around with these thighs. A lot.
Yeah, I just came from the A. I drove back home, 6-hour drive, 6.5.
The possibility of picking up an unexpended missile and throwing it back or tampering with it in any way is eliminated, since all of the gas has been discharged and is at work where it is needed.
Nigga, I love seeing shit like that. Question. How many faking they streams, getting they plays from machines? I can see behind the smoking mirrors, niggas ain't really big as they seem. I never say anything, everybody got their thing. Some niggas make millions, other niggas make memes. I'm on a money routine. I don't want smoke, I want cream. I don't want no more comparisons. This is a marathon, and I'm aware I've been playing a bet from a lack of promotions. I never was one for the bragging and boasting. I guess I was hoping the music would speak for itself, but the people want everything else. Okay, no problem, I show up on every one album. You know what the outcome will be. I'm betting 1,000. It's got to the point that these rappers don't even like rapping with me. Fuck it, come on, nigga. 21 Savage just hit me and told me he sent me a spot on a new record he got. He called it a lie. I opened my book and I jot. Pray for Takashi, they wanting a rap. I picture him inside a cell on a cot, reflecting on how he made it to the top, wondering if it was worth it or not.
So we can stop now.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much, Amy and Lisa, for that video. And I think she was going to introduce us, right?
No.
Oh, okay. I can start, Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead.
I think I forgot something. Well, I can just introduce ourselves. We're from Decolonize, this place. Left of me is Amy. Left of me is Marz. I'm Nitasha. I'm dyslexic, so I left and right, I mix it up all the time. So right is Amy, and then next to that is Amin. I just want to start with saying that all the work that we're going to talk about today, it's not just the work of us, the four of us, or even DCP, but it's really just about thinking, what does movement mean today? I think factoring in settler colonization, capitalism, technology, law, justice, mental health, doesn't matter which field you go and look at, we have to kind of think about what do decolonial and abolitionist movements look like. And so we all come from like shared personal histories where we've all, resisted in some ways since we were like born, but also what does an organized movement look like? And I think that's what we're kind of engaged as a political project to think about what are some of the questions that we need to think about as people living together in urban areas or people coming from rural areas? What does it mean to think about movements outside of the context of nation states? Because borders, don't matter. So these are some of the questions that we've been thinking about. And, we've been organizing, me and Amin met at ICP in New York, and Amin's, from Palestine, and I'm from India, from Punjab, and we started working together, and we thought of, under the idea of MTL Collective, but we started thinking about Palestine and what the cartography of the occupation is. What does it mean for us to engage with Palestine as artists, as people who are thinking about a movement world? And then from there, we kind of pivoted towards Occupy Wall Street as well, right? Which was, which went on for 2 years. And Amy, that's where we met Amy during Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Sandy. The reason why we mention Occupy Wall Street is because, we think about these ideas as, what the Zapatistas say. We're in Mexico City right now. That's where we're together. Some of us can't really get into the United States anymore. So we're kind of meeting in different places, kind of thinking together. So Occupy Wall Street was important because we were thinking about what the Zapatistas say, which is walking, you ask questions, and you have a long way to go. And we must not run, we must walk. And I think those are the things that we're interested in. So what have been the successes and failures of our movement organizing in New York, in Palestine, and other places that we come from? I think, for example, with Occupy Wall Street, of course, it factored into capitalism. And even though there was a lot of organizers who were, BIPOC organizers, it still failed on a race analysis and a gendered analysis. But from there came this infrastructure, but also a learning of how the US democratic system works, for example, in the movement world, how movements actually generally operate within the nation state of the United States. And I think that's from that place, that's why we say that it is really important that any of our movements that especially come from the United States or from Europe or from the West are anti-imperial before they're even abolitionist and decolonial, because we can keep running into that trap, And so we've been doing this work. I mean, Marz, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so just to kind of jump into some of the past work that we've done before we get to more current stuff and what's coming next. I think that the reason why we chose the 2 videos that we chose is to show both work that we did with the FTP formation, which was out in the streets, out in the city, and then also works that we did around institutions. Not to create a binary or dichotomy between the 2, but actually to show how they're interconnected and how the struggles that we may fight, inside of an institution such as a museum or a university or, a gallery or a library or any of these other institutions are interconnected to the same struggles that folks are fighting on the streets. So for, as an example, we have the Whitney Museum, right? Which is back, kind of back in the news again, actually. But the Whitney, always in the news. But the Whitney Museum, had Warren Kanders on its board as vice chairman. Warren Kanders is also the CEO of Safariland, which is one of the world's kind of leading non-lethal weapons manufacturers. And what made all of this kind of blow up actually was way back in 2018 on Thanksgiving, when then President Trump ordered that tear gas be deployed against the migrant caravan on the border of Tijuana, Mexico, and the United States. And photos, I'm sure we all can remember those photos that went viral at the time of tear gas being launched at, specifically an image of a mother and her 2 children. Images also went viral of the type of tear gas that was used, the manufacturer who produced the tear gas, which was Safariland. Then many people, articles had already been written before this about Safariland, and the fact that their tear gas was used in Ferguson, Standing Rock, Palestine, Turkey, Egypt, Puerto Rico, and so forth and so on. So actually it was the staff of the Whitney Museum, about 100 people, who penned and signed a letter demanding that Warren Kanders be removed from the Whitney Museum. And we came and uplifted that demand, but we were also just really thinking about, how does the museum play a role in our day-to-day lives? What violences do museums and other institutions play in the day-to-day when it comes to, the 6 strands that Decolonize this place were founded around: Indigenous struggle, Black liberation, free Palestine, degentrification, global wage workers, and dismantling patriarchy, but also so many, many, many more struggles. We pivoted from the Whitney Museum to FTP at the time, Fuck the Police formation, or Free the People, or Feed the People, or Fuck the Patriarchy, or Free the Pussy. There's synonyms, there's many things going on here. But in the pivoting to FTP was again to show that, the police are here on the streets, they're in the metro station, but it's to make the connection and the calling back to the fact that, we have military complexes, carceral complexes in institutions themselves. The MTA is an institution, right? And then from there, I think we want to, or actually I'll just pass it over to Amy to talk about, do you want to pull that up?
Yeah, that's what we
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're gonna share some
images.
Of some of the materials that we created over the years. So like what you're seeing right now is the Decolonial Operations Manual that we created in like early 2021. And so, right, like this actually is kind of a culmination of like, the work that we did, the study and the organizing and the aesthetics and the research and the action that all came together over the past 5 years, like around the actions that Marz was talking about, like with the Whitney, Brooklyn Museum, AMNH, and more. And then just like thinking about like, right, all these connections that we see among institutions, whether it's like cultural institutions or city institutions, state, government, and then also, right, like these like points of connection where power are communicating, where like power has no, borders and boundaries, where there is like what we call the interlocking directorates of these people in power and how they affect us in our daily lives in all these different places, like the Whitney, right, the streets of Brooklyn, Bronx, and many places even outside of the US. So it kind of brought us to thinking around like our interconnected struggles, right? How do we organize strategically in the city, since a lot of the organizing we do are in New York. When we were doing Strike MoMA, right? This was kind of, Strike MoMA was at MoMA, but it was also just a launching pad to kind of think about like power, movement, struggle everywhere. Right? We didn't want to get stuck at just one institution as well, right? Because we know, like we were saying earlier, these people touch every part of our lives and every like aspects, whether it's like hopping on a train to go to work, or like the schools that our children go to, or like even the way that we meet up with each other, or how we can't even meet up with each other because there is no space for us to do that. And so like with Strike MoMA, you know, there were many things happening.
Can I just add one thing before we go into Strike MoMA, because I forgot to mention, I think the reason why we were talking about Occupy Wall Street and also Decolonize this place as the 6 strands that Marz talked about. Decolonize this place came from learning of like different movements. Occupy Wall Street was one of them. The movement against Black Lives Matter and the Direct Action Front for Palestine, those were also really important points for Decolonize this place to think about. And also, as we were starting Decolonize this place in 2016, when we came up, we thought about these strands, was also at that time, Standing Rock was happening. And in fact, a lot of the solidarity work also happening during 2014 time, you know, around Akai Gurley and around what was happening in Ferguson with Mike Brown. These were really important pivotal moments for us in our organizing, because we were engaged in thinking about what kind of you know, how can we do these actions in the city? And you know, even though we're talking about museums over here, the museum, university, and the city, these have always been some of the points of interaction for us. For example, in a recent conversation that we had with Fred Moten and Stefano Harney and Jasbir Kaur and Sandy Grande, there was mentioned that museums are also precincts, right? And so our universities are also precincts. So I think what we're thinking about is like, how do we actually center land, water, and resources so that decolonization is not a shell game, right? How are we changing the idea of, you know, private property, thinking about not ownership of things, and also how are we maintaining relations, and how are we thinking about movements that are not carceral on themselves? Because we've also, you know, before Strike MoMA, we've also gone through the whole moment of the cancel culture, where, you know, there's of course a lot of conversation around, you know, what has been happened or what harm has happened, but we have not been able to, I think, collectively figure out what does even restorative justice means in our communities right now. And I think so at this point, you know, especially thinking about Strike MoMA, we've all been thinking about, okay, how are we pivoting then, you know? And it's also based on all of these different movements coming together. The abolition movement, the decolonization movement, the movement against borders, fighting patriarchy, right? So that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like Nick was saying, it's like we know things are fucked up,
Yeah.
right? Like we know things are fucked up everywhere. So it's like we know that there's a refusal. People are like wanting to like exit, refuse, sabotage, right? Like strike back and fight back in so many ways. But we also have to ask, it's like, what do we want to build? So it's like, how do we want to live? And how do we want to spend our time, right? Because like, so much of the way we live, our time and our energy and the spaces that we hold are taken away from us. And so like during Strike MoMA, right, there was that pivot away from the institution where, you know, it's not about like going into MoMA because like, right, fuck MoMA, like, but also it's like, right, how do we create spaces for us to like see each other, to talk to each other, to like play, right? And to think together and study together. And so like during Strike MoMA, you know, we created 10 weeks of art and action that occurred like in a plaza across the street from MoMA, as well as holding down like online spaces for people who are not in the city, because this is beyond New York City, beyond MoMA as well. Like trying to think of like, right, just the many spaces that we can hold together. And so, yeah, so these pictures that you see now is like the plaza across from MoMA. And one thing to think about is like, over the 10 weeks, we were slowly pushed out of the space as well, right? This is like supposed to be a public space, but it's really a POPS, which is like privately owned public space. So it was like CBS and Deutsche Bank that owns this space. And like over time, they like slowly built out scaffolding so that the whole plaza was blocked off, which pushed us closer to MoMA, like the front like steps of MoMA, which became like also like a nation state in itself because of how they like used police and like private security, and like it was like you could see another border forming like around MoMA's like entrances itself. So
maybe there's no need to
yeah, and some of these images are some of the things that happened within the plaza, like right, there was always food there, there was like poetry, there was dance, there was like quilt making, there were teach-ins. Yeah, it was a place in thinking of what a post-MoMA future could look like. And also, right, this was a space where it was unmediated by MoMA itself. So also like workers of MoMA could engage, right? Like they would come across the street like after their like shift and like be a part of this space. But it was also interesting because this is how we heard about like all the fuckery that like that Lowry like was initiating to like paint us out as like violent, and being like, right, using language of like, oh, we're all for protests, but you know, not this kind of thing. Like,
and it was especially in relation to this action, which was the Ruins of Modernity tour, that the museum kind of turned into that. Should we want to continue?
No, Marz, go ahead.
Yeah, so MoMA definitely marked a huge shift for us in terms of, you know, where we're engaging and how we're engaging. And by that, I mean that if you look at the work around like the Brooklyn Museum or the American Museum of Natural History that we've done in the past, we presented them with, you know, one demand, this idea of a decolonization commission. And the Decolonization Commission had 7 points that ranged from territorial acknowledgements made material, right? So not just, you know, saying territorial acknowledgement, but what are you actually doing to materially to recognize and to repatriate and to repair the fact that you're on unceded land, the fact that museums only exist through imperial plunder and so forth and so on. You know, the Whitney Museum, which came after kind of Brooklyn Museum and American Museum of Natural History actions, we saw as like a coming out party. We were just like, it's when we first started thinking like, you know, we need to make, this is bigger than these institutions. Like we've always said it was bigger than these institutions, but now we really wanted people to know that it was bigger. And Warren Cander's using tear gas that's been deployed all around the world against all of our struggles, against peaceful protesters everywhere, against people seeking asylum everywhere. It was in refuge, was like, okay, now we're starting to come out of this kind of box thinking as like a movement around institutions being separate from the streets. FTP came when we were in the streets. MoMA came after that. With MoMA, it was just like, actually, exit. Like just leave, there needs to be a mass exodus from these institutions. Like why, like no more legitimizing these institutions, no more engaging with conversation after conversation after conversation. The American Museum of Natural History is, I mean, I have to give it to them. They are really good at conversing. They really liked to have conversation after conversation after conversation. Brooklyn Museum, no response. You know, hashtag a non-response is not an option. And Pasternak, we're still waiting. Then we have, you know, MoMA, who literally, as Amy said, turned into this nation state with borders and security and a bunch of other fuckery. So from there, we went to Globalized Intifada, which actually came directly after Strike MoMA. The two actually fed into each other. Yeah. So we did 10 weeks of art and action for Strike MoMA, and then a couple of months as well for Globalized Intifada. But around this time is when Sheikh Jarrah was, the stuff around Sheikh Jarrah was happening, the continued occupation of Palestinian land, the continued taking of Palestinian land. And so a lot of folks were coming out for that, which made a lot of sense because there are people on the board of MoMA who create the bombs that are being dropped on Gaza, right? Literally if you have a struggle, if you have a bone to pick, I guarantee you they are on the board of MoMA, right? Some kid you didn't like in second grade stole your lunch. I bet they're on the board of MoMA, okay? Like that's just how it works. So we were working with Within Our Lifetime. We were working with Within Our Lifetime and doing Globalized Intifada, taking up the streets, going around doing tours of Midtown, doing tours around MoMA, doing tours everywhere, highlighting different sites of struggle, not just for Palestinians, but for all of our struggles. And so again, you see this back and forth between the institution and the streets, the institution and the streets.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think just specifically thinking about, you know, all the institutions that we've gone after, the American Museum of Natural History, Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, Guggenheim, the Whitney, I already mentioned. I think what you see is, like, I think from my experience, what's been insane to see is that any institution that still has, you know, beings and artifacts and like things that are, you know, sacred to a lot of us shouldn't be there. It's much easier to talk about reparations and decolonization in terms of those institutions versus something like Whitney or MoMA, because people think that shit's modern. So colonialism is from the past, right? And so you will actually see that a lot of the conversations that gets pivoted towards museums and institutions that have like a very clear colonial kind of a space visually. But actually, when you think about MoMA and you look at the board members, as Amy was saying, this idea of interlocking directorate, the board members of MoMA, you have Leon Black, who was a, who is a sexual harasser, but he owns the biggest art collection that MoMA is interested in, which is the Scream, for example. But now the Scream is going to Norway, right? Somewhere in Europe. Then you have people like, Blackwaters, who he's on Blackwater, like Blackwater, who basically is responsible for burning the Amazon. You have people like Larry Fink who are part of funding the NYPD. You have like people who are part of defining what anti-Semitism really means today, which basically concludes, so you can't say the word Palestine in a lot of universities and museums right now.
Or boycott.
Or that, you can, or you have Cisneros, whose partner, Patricia Cisneros, she runs the Cisneros, she has the biggest Latin American art collection. And she is, and Barrick Gold, which is the company that Cisneros owns, is responsible for mining in Dominican Republic. So, and he sits on the board of MoMA too. So there's that interconnecting directorate, and that is the response that we've, kind of articulated through Strike MoMA, which is, A, you need to de-assimilate from the system, because the whole thing, the way we've been having these movement conversations or conversations about what even the role of the artist is, have really been mediated through institutions. It could be the university artist, the city even, or the MTA, the hospital, the police. We can think about how they're framing a lot of us as mental health problems because we are not willing to assimilate into their timeline of modernity or even a linear timeline of life. None of us are ever on time in things. The way we think about time is much more expanded, than this linear timeline that 9 o'clock you have to go to work and 5 p.m. That's like that is a very capitalist and settler colonial model where your own body has been extracted till the end, and not include the land, body, everything's under extraction. And then the project of future that you're given is go to Mars and Moon because climate change is screwing up the planet. That's what we're up against, right? As even in the political field of imagination. And at the same time, places like Palestine are becoming more and more intense. Places like Punjab, more is getting lost. Places like, Detroit, places like East New York, more and more things are getting taken, and there's multiple places. You can think about Mexico City. The Mayan train, which is funded by Canada, is going through a whole development project, which is going to uproot all the Mayan communities, but so many indigenous communities from the land. So it's really, I think what we're trying to say is that there's really a very important reorientation that is required right now, that none of the institutions can fulfill that role.
And diversity and equity.
And diversity and equity and inclusion is just a game to have a seat at the table when you know that the table can't even be fixed, or we don't even need the table.
And there's no infrastructure and they don't want to fix it.
And they don't want to fix it. So I think in terms of just going through this work, I think the last two things I would say is, we've been thinking about this idea of the training in the practice of freedom, which is something that Gayatri Spivak talks about, but I think we can expand it to basically think, okay, what does even freedom mean? Or what does decolonization mean? Or what does abolition mean? That none of these really have a blueprint, but in the act and in the process, in the practice of that, in the training of the practice of freedom, we can think about what movements mean. We can keep going. And we have to make sure that we de-assimilate. And then the other part is that we have to really think about them as desire-driven approaches versus pain-driven approaches. Because what we've realized is that these institutions are more interested in our pain, right? That's why you get representation as a very important political tactic, which actually is a very liberal logic at this point, thinking about the structures that we are living in. So you have diversity, equity, inclusion being completely weaponized, right, at this point. And then you have our pain being taken and represented in institutions that don't even know how to hold that with care. So how can we actually think about the work that we do or the projects that we do more from this desire-driven mode? And this is something that comes, of course, from Kay Wayne and the Eve Tuck, who wrote Our Words, The Refusal of Research, how we need to refuse. And I think that's the kind of refusal that we're thinking about, and how do we work, and then how do we reorient so that we can come up with our own models of taking care of each other in terms of be it mental health, be it pedagogy. I mean, kids are getting labeled left, right, and center right now in terms of either their ADD, ADHD, or autistic, or some other mental disorder, but schools, the university, none of this is actually functional or taking care of ours. So how do we actually reorient, and what are the kind of positions that we have to take, and where do we have to invest our time?
Yeah.
I mean, and also like everything that we make, like these images that we are showing you, right, whether they're the stickers or the zines or the operations manual, right, these are all like movement generated art, right? It comes from movement generated theory, right? It's very much embedded within the work of organizing, and it's like embedded in like also the relationships that we build as we are building movement together, right? Like it doesn't happen in isolation, and like the imagination and that comes out of it is through the discussions that we're having, right? The political discussions that we're having that's like rooted in a political project towards like collective liberation and freedom, right? So it doesn't just end on a single issue. Like, even though we understand that like people have, immediate concerns, but also understanding those immediate concerns are embedded into a larger structure, right? So it's like, is this a project, like, are we working on a project of liberation? Like, if we're thinking about health and housing, like we know they all feed into each other. Like our mental health is not going to be great if we don't have housing or food or like childcare or any of this stuff, it's like, and the way that the society is set up, it's like it's meant for us to be like directed towards the economy, right? So all of our time is like eaten up by like, oh, we have to work. We have to work to pay rent. We have to work to like get
pay
food.
The police that kill you and build the wall and occupy Palestine and wage war on Ukraine.
For things that doesn't actually like bring us closer to being able to live.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap up, again, this is the work of a lot of people, but I think we can say something about the moment. I think if you follow us on Instagram, I think that's really kind of where we think together and where we put things out for other people to think, while we continue to think of the next phase. And it's part of why we're here in Mexico. But I think one thing we just want to say is like, you know, in the last project that we did of thinking in Philly with others there, the ideas was two questions. What time is it on the clock of the world? Which is a question Grace Lee Boggs would ask. And, you know, what is to be done? And I think those two questions are for each of us. And we have a responsibility to ask them with honesty. And we have a responsibility to recognize that whether, you know, whether you think yourself an artist or whatever, if you're participating in the system, then you're both complicit, but you have agency. And I think that the choices that we have to make are, if they are viewed individual, if they were viewed on this thing of like, well, I have to get mine, you know, in a way you're on the other side of things. Now, I think one of the things why we're participating in this conversation and why we're very kind of welcoming of being invited by an institution is so somehow we can reach people within the institution, because we know the institution is also not a monolith, and we spoke of big ones, but each of us fights where they are. Mm-hmm. And there's, you know, there's unpaid internships, there's, you know, worker rights, there's, you know, attacks on unions. The question of a reorientation to each other happens at every level, away from powers of domination and oppression and towards each other, where the debts that will never be repaid to each other, can never be repaid, are recognized. And within that is the notion of a social fabric that can allow and sustain many worlds to exist. But it's necessarily not in tandem with the nation state. We're at a point when you ask us collectively as four, we must act in an anti-national, like fuck the United States, in an anti-imperial, meaning fuck borders. And I think that there's a long history of decolonization in the 60s in which they cheated people by actually replacing the colonial powers with proxies in varying degrees and calling it international trade. So if that's kind of the structure that we're inheriting globally, and you see it in New York, then for us, an analysis is like the NYPD is an occupation force. We in fact don't recognize their legitimacy. Whether we're able to act on it or not, it informs our aesthetics, it informs our engagements, it informs of how we think about the world and how we think about this country. And I'll say this because as a person who for this work was investigated by the FBI or is investigated by the FBI or doesn't know whether they're fucking investigated by the FBI and can talk to anyone and they're an American citizen born on this land, or a person like Nitasha who because of FTP seemingly is not permitted for security reasons to return to the United States. So none of this is a joke. And when we say globalize the Intifada, we mean insurgency everywhere in the ways that people recognize how they are to exist and persist and sustain life through them. So the exit is a point of kind of encounter elsewhere in which it could invite the aesthetics, it can think about the complexity of there is no purity. For us, it doesn't matter whether there's an outside or not. And where we're working, there doesn't seem to be. So if there's no outside, then we're in it. And if we're in it, then we're actually being played on each other and we're harming each other. But the whole thing is sustained by us. And that's really why we keep moving, to understand, to reach each other, to figure out. And now relationships of trust are infrastructure. Friendship is political. How we actually organize each other in smaller groups that can sustain each other, that can make stuff, that can eliminate the separation of art, that can recognize how the word activism is actually operating to separate people from each other, that we're all active in our lives, we all have a political role to play, that it's not about inclusion. Even if the notion on the levels, and I'll give two examples, low reparations or debt. In the context of reparations, it's not about reparations that go back into private property or things that get repatriated to a fucking government. That doesn't work. That actually gets used against the entire process of liberation. Then you say debt. Well, the notion of debt, that you actually owe someone for future life that you have, in which you probably never repay, to get a job doing the shit that you hate, in the hopes that at 65 you still have retirement. That's the contract that people bought into and born into, and that's the dream that they keep recycling for us. But it's what keeps everything going. So then where's the refusal gonna come from? And how is the refusal material? And how is it going to sustain itself? And how is it going to communicate elsewhere? And how is it going to operate across the fucking wall of MoMA, across the border of Palestine? And that's kind of what DTP has been engaged in.
We're done.
Well, thank you then. All right. So that's the closing words, yes? Amy, you want to say anything?
Maybe closing words this way.
Yeah, as I said at the top of this presentation, like I have been following this movement forever. I feel like this, I mean, I don't have any words to speak because I think they said it. I think they said it all. Like, I think we're at a crucial period in history and it's time for us to act. And I'm so happy that we not only have the inspiration in DTP, we have a blueprint. We have, what's the word I'm looking for? We have comrades in the struggle. We have comrades in the fight. So it's not one person, fighting for one belief. There are many of us who are aligned, and I love hearing you speak because every time I hear you speak, I'm reminded that I'm not alone. I'm reminded that there's more work to do. I'm reminded that I'm here for a reason. So I guess I want to say thank you, first and foremost, for continuing to do the work and for being unafraid, because this is not easy work, So that's my 2 cents.
All right, well, we're going to end the live stream then. Thank you all very much.